Welcome to the Soulful Entrepreneur podcast. I'm your host, Lucy Stepanyan. In today's episode, we have an entrepreneurial adventure story of Haik Mika Zadikian, who founded a unicorn when the term unicorn didn't even exist for startups. After he exited his first billion-dollar startup, he founded four other ones under the umbrella of Iris Labs. A serial entrepreneur who experienced the dream and the nightmare of every aspiring entrepreneur. This episode is about the grit and resilience of a serial Armenian entrepreneur and the pioneer in the broadband revolution in the US, Haik Mikhail Zadikian. Welcome to the podcast, Haik. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure.
I want to start with the story of you moving to the US. I guess you were quite young when you moved, about 16, and you moved with your family, with your parents from Syria. Can you tell us the story why you guys moved to the US?
My parents wanted us to have better opportunities, just like everyone else's, I suppose. And the political instability there was a concern to my father. He gave up a lot. Both of my parents sacrificed a lot to have us come to the U.S. My father actually foresaw the Civil War all the way back in, the 70s. So we are just, happy that they took that step. It was a very difficult move. I was actually 15. Came at a very difficult age. And it was quite a struggle at first, but then, life began to happen.
And you hardly spoke the language when you just moved, correct?
Yeah, academic, but the first 8 months or so, it couldn't go beyond a hello and, my name is this or that. So yeah, it was a challenge.
Yeah. So I think continuing your journey, you had a very successful entrepreneurial career, corporate career. And I just want to understand, like, what was this thirst or hunger for success? Where did this come from? Was this an immigrant thirst for the American dream, so-called, or an entrepreneurial streak that ran in your family? Have you thought about that before?
It's an interesting question. I mean, it really, maybe we're born a little bit with it, just generally as a culture, whether it's the Armenian or the Syrian culture. As you know, Steve Jobs was the most famous Syrian, of course. And I would say maybe my mother has the gene, I would say, more so than my father. My father had strong work ethics and values, and not that my mother didn't, but it's the combination. And I was particularly inspired by computing, and that really had a lot to do with it. And of course, as an immigrant, just like any immigrant, well, maybe not any immigrant, but it is the classic American, thing to do, right? Is to find this place that's special, you strive for. And it wasn't so much financial motivation. It was more about, accomplishing something, climbing a peak, making a difference, feeling good about it. It was a combination of all these things motivating me. But it wasn't just overnight that I felt particularly entrepreneurial. It grew with time, and also it was an amazing time with communications growing, computers just coming on the market, and everyone wanted to, talk about it. So it was just a combination of all these things. A lot of luck too, but a lot of hard work, a lot of everything.
Interesting. I never believed in luck, but then I think it's just about, being in the right place at the right time, which I think is luck to a certain extent, but also is intuition and some kind of a feeling that you get, a hunch that you get about a deal or about a path to take. So yeah, interesting.
One of the biggest things is that when a door opens, even if it's just a crack, um, you know, you could walk the other way, and was that luck, or if or have the curiosity to go open that door just a little bit and see what's behind it, and there's always multiple doors, and there are all these opportunities. All too often, you see people who just turn the other way. I don't know if it's fear, conservatism, or whatever it is that, but you have to take the initiative to make luck happen, maybe as a way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Can you tell us the story of your first startup? I think you were in your early 20s when you founded your first startup. And what was it? What was the drive behind finding it? And also, did you start right after graduating from university, or did you have some work experience before starting your first?
Oh, my experience has started with my sophomore year, and by my junior year, I was actually a full-time student and a full-time professional. So, and then all throughout masters, I worked full-time as well. So I think that was one of the biggest things that made a difference for me, because you learn so much more at work than at school. But the combination of the academic side, the theory, and the practice was really, really helpful. There were instances where my professors didn't have that experience, and they would ask me how it worked, how communications worked, how could two computers talk to each other. It was, a very fascinating thing. So yes, the first startup was something that I proposed that our company does, but they were reluctant to do it, and I decided to go out and do it myself. Unfortunately, the timing wasn't right. So here's an example. Because the venture community had like completely stopped funding companies. The numbers were so negative. Um, Even though we had good technology. Also, I was very young, and back then they did not entertain such young entrepreneurs really very much at all. And this was after the fall of this, around the time the fall of the Soviet Union and all the recession that followed, particularly in California, where defense industry was hard hit. So all of these things, but it was an amazing lesson, right? You learn how to put a team together, technology together, go out and pitch it. It was a wonderful experience.
Yeah. And how long did this experience last for you? Was it a year or two?
No, it was a year, maybe slightly less. The interesting thing is that our technology, our concepts were valid. And lo and behold, Cisco contacted me and said, we're trying to do this thing. And it was a lot, like 80, 90% like my project. And I said, well, if you can't join them, if you can't beat them, join them and lead them, as they say. That's how I joined Cisco, and that's um, so something good again came out of it, because it
Yeah.
wasn't just a failure and you moved on to something else. That's actually one of the good lessons to learn, is that there is something value. If there's something valuable about what you're doing, there's going to be interest. So sometimes you want to stick with it. Sometimes you want to walk away from it. And that's, it's hard to say, right?
Yeah. I think just making the decision to walk away or stay is super difficult. You can't tell, especially in the initial stages. But then you're also running a risk of wasting a lot of time on something. On the other hand, though, you're also running a risk of not getting to the opportunity. So it's really difficult. And I think this is where this entrepreneurial intuition or hunch that comes into play that makes you want to decide that, okay, I'm sticking with it. I believe in it and I think I'm going to continue. But I really like this idea that you started this startup and it actually morphed into something different, which you joined Cisco and continued working on the same project or joined for something completely different.
No, essentially a very similar project to my startup. But of course, Cisco was just beginning to grow. And by that, I mean, like we were talking about a couple of hundred people, not not the, I don't know, I think it peaked at 100,000 people or so. They nobody really knew or cared about the internet at the time. So this notion of how we take the existing world and transition it to an internet world was a wild idea. And and it was a wild ride. And actually, my idea was better at Cisco than it would have been on my own in that sense.
Mhm.
It was such a springboard for me to really experience that. So it was like walking into this dark cave, which you thought was a dark cave, lighting a little match, and then seeing this entire world in front of you, being available to be conquered. But it was a lot like, let's say Amazon's dominance today that IBM had, a lock on networking. Nothing that we do today would have been possible without us breaking that lock that IBM had. And there were, roadkills on the road. For decades, people trying to break the lock that IBM had on networking. It stifled growth. It stifled everything. So suddenly I found myself in the midst of that, actually leading that effort. So it was really satisfying.
So you basically pioneered this broadband revolution, so to speak, at
This
Cisco,
is actually prior to
globally.
the internet revolution. So it was
Mhm.
confined to universities and CAD systems and things like that. Boeing used it, but no serious commercial company, Fortune 500 company, really used this for their business. In fact, I was thrown out of Citibank for proposing that they put their business on the internet, on IP, let alone the internet.
Mhm.
Um, so it was a suicide mission, and now it's unfathomable that every mom and pop shop is on the internet. For, the Fortune 500, of course, and way beyond. But it wasn't obvious. It was very risky. It was a
Mhm.
crazy idea, and I walked away from a lot of presentations with cold sweat, and some being actually thrown out of there. No one was fired for buying IBM, and so they stuck to their conservative notions. But we managed to break through that in just 2 to 4 years, and in 6 years, completely KO'd IBM out of the networking business. And this is why we have what we have today. It was been recognized in the trade papers at the time. It was a huge battle. There were cartoons about it. So suddenly my life was on the front pages of things were weekly then. So you woke up very nervous on a Sunday, on a Monday morning and see what was going to be in the papers that week.
Wow.
Yeah, and the rest is history.
Wow, that's super cool. How long did you stay with Cisco?
So I stayed there exactly 4 years, and
Mhm.
that led to the broadband thing. So our routers were huge.
Mhm.
They were like, size of a shoebox, whereas broadband, and by then it was interesting. Early in my career, when I went to parties with people and they would ask me what I did, and I said, we do this internet thing. They go, oh, that's cool, and would walk away. So suddenly there was this inflection point around 93, 94. I couldn't get rid of people at the parties. Circles formed. Everyone wanted to hear about the internet. So that then came the broadband revolution because it was just too slow to the home. But you needed a router to be size of a credit card, maybe a little bit bigger to make that economically viable, the size viable, and so on. And once again, it was counterintuitive that anyone would pay $40 a month to get internet 24/7 high speed at home. Now we can't
Mhm.
live without it. So all these things, it takes that, maybe the big word is vision, but maybe it's just the instinct or the gut or the belief, like you said, one has to have and pursue it. So I left a lucrative I left my position at Cisco because these guys could do this little tiny router. And that sparked the whole, we deployed all of the first 100, 200,000 lines in all of the US. And then the rest of the world got interested too. And yeah, and so on. But that venture ultimately didn't pan out, and it failed actually because I was not the CEO. The CEO was a very wild character, and alienated the investment community. So they really, literally just went after him. So that was another lesson learned that personality matters a lot, the tone you set in the company, and so on. I think I'm answering more than your question, but it actually leads to the next topic. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I want to know, you basically had this newfound fame, so to speak. How did you handle it? Did you enjoy it?
It was well, I was a controversial figure at trade shows and such. You could see people, looking at you from the corner of their eye. The people who were threatened, their jobs were threatened by IBM going down. It was a huge ecosystem, right? They didn't like me very much, but then I had fans on the IP side, so it it was fine. It was fine in the end.
Interesting. So you basically left Cisco for the startup, which, as you said, failed, but then you founded another startup right after. Can you tell us the journey? Because I
Yeah,
think
so this
you.
was
Mhm,
yeah, this was the interesting transition.
mhm,
The person, the CEO alienated the investment community, but they really liked our technology and they liked our people. They liked everybody but the CEO. So the investment community came to me and said, "What can you put together?" But I remembered this one turning point incident where I was at Sundance, Utah, at a Goldman Sachs conference. And these guys were celebrating around midnight. They were smoking cigars and drinking single malt. And they invited me over as I was walking to my room. I said, I really cannot stay. This is a perfect example of a little opportunity that just pops up, and your natural tendency is just to go to bed because you have a big day the next day. And I almost didn't. So I sat down with these guys that had just done a $5 billion IPO, and they were multiplying bandwidth on the fiber by like a factor of 16 and ultimately 256 times without digging the grounds again, which is really why we have all this bandwidth that we have. The reason we're having this podcast with video for free is exactly that. So I said, what is the problem now? And then I said, we don't know how to manage all this bandwidth, and a whole new class of equipment is needed. So when the venture capitalists asked me this, I thought about this little bar thing, and I started pursuing that, and printed a whole bunch of material, went to public libraries at the time, and got my seed fund, and then very quickly we took off. We got our investment from Sequoia Capital and a number of others. And we were the first investment, actually. We tricked Sequoia into investing outside of the Silicon Valley. Their motto was, we can't drive to it, we're not going to invest in it. So we moved after we took our investment. And we moved to Texas because all the telecom, we were outsiders. All the telecom talent was in Richardson, Texas. We flew in and started building the company. And amazingly, we won the AT&T core backbone in just 12 months. We grew to 120 people. We took an investment from my alma mater, Cisco, which stipulated they could buy the company. And the moment we did not expect to win the AT&T backbone. This was a multi-billion-dollar contract, so I felt really silly. I felt stupid. Selling for the deal was 550, and it could grow with the stock, so we ended up actually delivering 1.1 billion to our investors. We did that in just 15 months on a $10 million investment. They got $660 million back, and everyone was thrilled. So that was a phenomenal success, although it felt like a failure at the time. And then the industry melted, and I went from feeling, silly, feeling stupid to feeling like I was a genius. And all the other people who didn't, so they ended up, crashing. The entire ecosystem collapsed. AT&T today is just the name that was bought. So another amazing thing happened. So experiencing all these ups and downs was really like lesson after lesson after lesson.
Yeah.
And it just like shapes you. It makes you who you are ultimately. So you learn more from failures and probably less from successes. And but all in all, it's like I can't imagine any other way of
That's
being.
amazing. Wow, your story is amazing, and it's just I don't know how to think about someone who went through all of that, has all of this history, and I'm talking to you right now. That's super cool. But I wanted to take a step back. You mentioned that the investor community came to you. I wanted to know, why do you think that was? Was it because you had the know-how, the personality? Was it a combination of things, or you knew the right people? What was that thing that made them come to you specifically, you think?
The thing is that the broadband technology we had was so far ahead of anybody else's, yet the company failed. So they attributed that to us. And I was the lead figure there. So they came to me. I said, when you do something, we would like to fund it. And it was the polar opposite, where you're banging on the door to get in to a place like Sequoia. It was an open invite. It is still an open invite for any new thing I do. But yeah, that was. But personality does matter. Yeah.
How did you, I mean, again, those were ups and downs, right? So after the meltdown, the industry, you obviously, like, you felt, well, in this case, you felt like you were a genius, but there were before that some challenges that you faced. Like, how did you cope with the loss of, such a successful business, and like, you had to sell? What did you do? Did you go for a retreat or take what people do today, like meditation courses? And what was your coping strategy back then?
Well, the coping strategy is like, if your dog dies, you go get a new puppy. And until you get a new puppy, you're not really going to be happy. So I just went on to the next thing. Um, really, but there were so many amazing moments where you are so elated. And the prize does matter, it does change your life. You do the things that you dreamed of for a while. You don't want to be, uh, you know, you don't want to be a slave to money. You want it to be a convenience. So uh, you you know so coping with it, maybe coping with success is actually just as hard,
Yeah.
because you don't know what to do, what direction you run. Everyone comes to you, family, extended friends, extended friends,
Yeah.
with things that they want to do that they need funding for. It's really a wild thing.
Mm.
But on the failure side, people were worried, like, is he going to do something crazy? I'm like, are you kidding me? It's just like we just move on to the next thing. So
Yeah. Which you actually did, because right after you sold the company, or maybe with a short gap, you started four companies at the same time, which was under one umbrella, the Iris Labs, which was super interesting for me to understand. How did you come up with that model? It was a super innovative model. No one has started a multi-startup company before. Um,
Yeah, this is pre-incubator, or around the time there were some incubators coming about, but it was a common vision of an end-to-end optical world where we're just kind of like actually what we're living right now. And with free bandwidth for all, extreme convenience, and all those things. Yes, essentially, most of the same investment community funded us. Um, it was wild. It was called Series A then, but it was actually comparable to seed money now. But I raised $100 million in of several Series A's for these companies in the span of like 3-4 months. Uh,
mhm,
and this is, we're talking about money then, which you can multiply by 2 today, or maybe 4. And we grew like wildfire. We had
mhm,
all sorts of wonderful people. And we went back to AT&T, and we were out to win, their business again. They were super interested, but not just AT&T, Verizon as well. And this was really large equipment, and also metro area systems. We were challenged by the incumbents, but we won again, except that this time the industry, I was referring to the meltdown in the industry, which is this particular time, not the prior venture.
mhm,
And and AT&T today, like I mentioned, is Southwestern Bell, having bought the AT&T name.
mhm,
So the entire telecom industry was decimated. Valuations dropped by a factor of 99% or worse. It was an unbelievable time. Talk about a bubble burst.
mhm.
Huge bubble burst. So that's how did I cope with that? I went to a mountain and sat in a bathtub for a week. Uh, and around the time MP3 was coming in, so I transferred all my CD music to my little MP3 device, and stared at the sky in Yosemite. So yeah, and then you go on again. I did take a
Yeah.
little break this time, and raised a family, did a lot of things, but always wanted to go back. One of the things that was interesting in all this is that you learn how to transition from one space to another. The spaces I
Mhm.
mentioned, they seem all similar at a 50,000 foot level, but when you come down to it, they're separate industries, no common people across them. You're starting anew. So that ability to transition is what I think the greatest strength one could put garner, especially if you're interested in a long career,
Mhm.
because things are moving so fast, right?
Yeah.
Today we have AI. A little while ago we had the blockchain, and then before that the app world exploded. And so if you do not transition from one of these things to the next, um, you just you're not going to be relevant.
Yeah.
So staying current is a really big thing. We are now doing an AI project, and it's super exciting. I just kicked myself that I didn't start 10 years ago. We did do something, but didn't lead to ChatGPT. I kicked myself.
Mm.
But in any case, so these successes and the ups and downs are the incredible lessons. On paper, this $100 million investment had mushroomed to something on the order of, we were estimating about 60 to 70 billion dollar valuation, and
Mhm.
of course it completely went to zero. The technology is still out there, by the way, being used. but the value disappeared, and a big chunk of that was my personal piece.
Wow.
So yeah, it was quite a
Yeah.
lesson.
That probably was even more difficult to cope with than the previous uh, the failure. I wouldn't say that was a failure. You basically exited with $550 million. So that's probably
No,
quite
no,
a
that
successful
was the
exit.
success scenario. The
Yeah.
broadband was the
The
failure.
broadband. Yeah.
I wouldn't call it failure either, because the technology got deployed. We just didn't make money.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, success versus failure, to just sum it up. So in a way, things have alternated from, success, failure, success, failure, success, failure. 50% hit rate, I guess, isn't too bad in this world of tech, where the odds are heavily stacked against you.
Yeah. Have you experienced after you folded with Iris Labs, have you experienced identity loss? Because as I'm thinking about myself, I was a business owner back in Armenia, a small business, nothing huge. And then I moved to the US in 2018 and kind of had to completely change my identity because you leave behind something that you worked on and your entire life, your family, and you come here and you're a completely different person. So it felt like a part of me died and I had to like adapt to this new persona, new Lucine. And then I had to bury the old Lucine who was back in Armenia. So I imagine that after this, like you would experience some sort of a identity crisis and you would have to push yourself back in, or was that not the case for you?
Not so much. It actually happened more with the transition, the immigration transition. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say the closest thing what you're describing would be the transition from one of these ventures to the next. All along the way, you were shedding your old self and becoming a new person, because we were going into a new space,
Yeah.
new people, new technology, and the chip people don't know the systems people, the hardware people don't know the software people. They're just very different industries. So you had the um, more of a more than loss of identity, is more like reinventing your identity each time
Yeah.
you move from one space to another. Very few people I know from my entire career have transitioned much. They all basically
Yeah.
stayed in one place, maybe one parking spot over, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think I love that. It's a reinvention, not loss of identity. I think that that's an important distinction to make. I read an article about you from Fast Company, which said that basically at the time when you were running the Iris Labs, you had like 400 emails on your phone, notifications popping out, and then you had 1 a.m. conference calls, and like you were on the go all the time. And I think you said that interruptions actually help you, like you're used to interruptions, and then adrenaline kind of helps you to stay on top of things.
Yeah,
From
maybe
that,
early. I'm
mhm.
sorry, go ahead, finish.
Yeah, no worries.
Uh,
From that early, from the crazy hectic lifestyle, did you have to transition to a more relaxed and a balanced lifestyle? And do you, looking back, do you regret that you were running on the go all the time, or do you think it was productive?
Oh, it was super productive, and I loved it actually. I still love doing that.
Mhm.
I'm a little bit in that mode right now. We have like 6, 7 different teams, and every context is very different. That's a multi-discipline project we are doing. It's a stealth,
Mhm.
so I can't tell you about it.
Right.
But it has that same adrenaline rush. It keeps you laser focused actually on the goals. So all in all, it's not as intense as it once was. This is the early days of multitasking, right?
Right.
But my time was scheduled in 5-minute increments. That was,
And
uh,
you were thriving on that. You enjoyed it.
and yeah, it's the rush. It's a rush. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that looking back, like the times when it was most hectic, when I had to do multiple things during the same day and I had to be in different places, I like that too. So I think entrepreneurs really thrive on this drive and go, and you have to be on the go all the time. So yeah, maybe there is something to it. It's not just about work-life balance, which I think is actually a myth.
Yeah, the work-life balance thing, I mean, what we're talking about is sprinting here, right?
Yeah.
When you're doing 100-yard dash, you're completely focused on the goal. You're not looking on your sides, what's going on, this or that, trying to balance your life. No, this is like a 100-yard dash, and you do it as quickly as you can. It depends on the venture, of course. Um, we pursued only things that had not been done before, which meant they were fiercely competitive spaces, a lot of faith in the future that this vision will hold, and all these things that like give you butterflies in your stomach. You're just like, you don't know. I'll give you one example of the broadband thing of all my friends, everyone I talked to, they thought I was insane leaving Cisco for
Mhm.
this crazy notion that you want internet on all the time in your home. It's just like, it's such a gamble.
Yeah.
And look at it now. So the same thing with every one of them. So you got to have it's don't try to balance life, but uh, I'm not saying just be a machine. At some point, a time comes where you should take the time and do the more important things in life.
Which are.
Family, have
Mhm.
hobbies, enjoying life because we only live once, right? So
Yeah.
it's that's where you can try to strike a balance. But I think it's the personality of an entrepreneur ultimately tends to be imbalanced, right? You
Yeah.
go crazy after something, and then you move on to the next thing. So.
Yeah. I read an article which talks about entrepreneurial personalities, and it says that entrepreneurs either they are super insecure and that's one of their drivers. They want to prove the world that they can do something, or they have an exaggerated self-confidence, sense of self-confidence. I want to know, what do you think? Which spectrum do you lie on, or is there somewhere in the middle that we don't know about?
Oh, no, I would say more on the self-confidence side. Maybe a little exaggerated, but I don't know if the word is exaggerated, but um, you have to believe in what you do, and
Mm.
confidence comes with it. There's a whole set of values that come with it, if I may, segue to that.
Mhm.
The enthusiasm that comes with confidence. But you do want to be a bit paranoid about the competition or what might happen. The rock is going to hit you from above, and the ecosystem is going to disappear. Things that you cannot worry about, anything you cannot do anything about, you don't worry about too much, but you watch everything, like a hawk that could destroy your venture. um, you have to be fiercely competitive, and there's a healthy dose of paranoia associated with that.
Mhm.
Also, if you're doing groundbreaking new things, game-changing plays, you have to aim high. So with that, you have to inspire people to believe in your vision. So all of that just has to come from, confidence. And
Yeah.
then that leads to everything else. It leads to the trust you build in your team. The leadership style also matters. You're not telling people what to do. You're not telling them. You inspire them so that they have the initiative to do things, and correspondingly, you share the upside with the team. So everyone has a stake in the game. I mean, unfortunately, as an industry, we have moved from this model that was pervasive to more of a winner takes all model.
Mhm.
And that was, the Hollywood model, I'd like to call it. And that takes away for something. Basically, you work really hard, you get very little, and your hope is that you're the star of the next movie, right? And so I don't believe in that. I believe that we should share. I hope that inspires people to share. Yeah, so all of this is rooted, all these things are related, I should say: confidence, enthusiasm, leadership by example, building trust, having some healthy dose of paranoia so that you keep your eye on the ball, aiming high. These are all, I think, values that, you know, I'd like to see, if there's a generation out there looking to be inspired to adopt these notions, because I think these are the most important things that I learned.
Yeah. Well, when I talk to you, I get a sense that as you were building your companies or working on products or whatever, it felt like it seems like it was like more like a game for you, more interest, curiosity. It wasn't anything like a work. I have to do this. I have to go to work and I have to achieve this result. Is that correct? Is my assumption correct
Yeah,
in
I
this case?
mean, the joke was like, I can't believe they're paying me to do this.
Right.
So loving it. I think that is actually one of the most magical aspects of this. I mean, how many people wake up in the morning and dreading that work day? And to be in a place where you can do that. But I have to say, it's self-made. You can make it to
Yeah.
be that way. It's in your hands. So like the opportunities in the past existed essentially only in the Silicon Valley, and now it's all over the world. I mean, we have a substantial team in Armenia right now, and they are inspired by these principles. As a place where, as we well know, you have to earn trust, whereas in the U.S. we tend to trust until we have a reason to distrust. It's the other way around. It's a breath of fresh air, really. So I think these are universal values. We just have to blend them correctly with the local culture, whether it's Armenia, Europe, or elsewhere,
Mhm.
to to be successful. It's an unbelievable time, and also you don't need the crazy hardware that we used to need. We had to make our own chips. So now, a couple of guys with the right software tools, they can start something. And even actually, there's codeless startups that
Yeah.
you've never written a line of code. You can start a tech company. Imagine that. So many amazing possibilities are ahead of us. There will be, bubble bursts. I mean, that's just the
Yeah.
nature of how things work. So maybe there's an AI bubble burst. Maybe, there's been a crypto bubble burst. These things will come and go. That's actually another thing, is to be able to see beyond these bubbles, right? And and uh, and and if you can correctly time the bubble, that's actually
Avoid it.
one of the best things you can do. Yes, avoid the bubble.
Yeah, amazing. You mentioned you're working with Armenia on a few projects, AI projects right now. I want to know, is it easy to work with Armenians? Or is it easier to work with Americans? Or is there it's difficult to compare, I guess. What's your
Uh,
stance?
I think you're asking me a trick question. You're putting me on the spot here. I think as Armenians, we tend to be more difficult culturally speaking than the American culture, let's just say. But these are Armenia has a long-standing culture, although it's been affected by all the invasions and most recently the Soviet culture that still has some pervasiveness there, or remnants of. Um, so yes, maybe we're not as difficult as some other culture X somewhere to do, but I think overall we tend to have the entrepreneurial gene. A lot of people want to do their thing. And the Armenia environment actually does encourage it. The government encourages it. There are incentives for being in Armenia and doing these great things. And we punch way over our weight as a country and as a culture, I have to say. We just need to learn to trust each other more,
Hmm.
share a bit more. It's okay if you go work for somebody else. Don't try to be the independent guy who's going to do it himself. There's a right time for everyone and everything. This is maybe one of the biggest things we can infuse into Armenia is the understanding of that, this notion of my own business isn't necessarily the best thing. There's a time and place for it. So, but overall, I am optimistic, and of course, that's why I'm there. And incidentally, it is my really first brush with Armenian culture.
Hmm.
Uh, and overall, the intelligence of the people, the education level, the quality um, uh, is is really conducive. And it actually goes back to Soviet days, as I understand it. It was the innovation part of the Soviet Union. So many science projects and all these things originated in Armenia by Armenians as well. So I'm bullish. We just need to be a little bit self-critical and not take it yeah, we do have some an ego issue. We need to be a bit more humble,
Yeah,
and actually that opens doors, I think.
I agree. I think if, even in myself, I've realized that I have that ego thing that I'm not worse than he or she is. Like, why can't I do that? Like, that. And then I realized that's the Armenian blood in me, the gene that makes you want to prove to others that you're better and you're more worthy than anyone else. I think that we need to humble ourselves a little bit, but also like aim high. And but taking criticism is difficult for Armenians. I think just to take criticism objectively and understand that not all criticism comes from a negative perspective, I think is important for us as a nation to understand.
I think you get so much out of constructive criticism, and it's almost universally taken as negative.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I have you know uh, tapered that a bit, and it's also just it's not helpful. If it's not helpful, there's no reason to do it. But what you said, if like I am just as good as this other person over here,
Yeah.
I can do it. That is, the essence of entrepreneurship. It is the little thing inside of you that says, I have this dream, I can do it too, and I think it's good. I think the future is bright.
Great. One thing that excited me very much as we were speaking, you mentioned before that you think that Armenian women are super promising. And why do you think that? What makes us promising?
The Armenian women, I think, are strong, principled. I mean, these are generalizations, of course, but we're talking about tendencies,
Yeah.
and I think even going back to Soviet times, the women carried the load more than the men did.
Yeah.
Uh, there is there's a greater sense of like they like to work. Um, I haven't seen very many lazy Armenian women. So it's I think it's a special trait. And there are numbers to support this, I think.
Yeah.
I think more than half the workforce is female in Armenia, just broadly speaking. And you see it when you go there.
Yeah.
You know, the you know they work. They make things happen. They things move. The gears are turning. Uh, Not just because of the women, but women have a bigger role, I think, than in other cultures, including the U.S.
Mhm.
So I think that's actually super cool.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think women are more flexible because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a lot of men lost their jobs and were not able to get back on their feet. But women would do any type of job. They would just do it for the sake of their family. And I know that first-handedly, I've experienced my mom do any type of job just to support our family. And that's amazing because like you can just so we have a pride as Armenian nation, especially Armenian men. Thus, they have a pride. I'm not going to drive a cab in Armenia, or I'm not going to go and work in a restaurant. And then you will see women just like doing any type of jobs and cleaning, cooking, whatnot for others. So,
It was particularly striking to us coming from Syria, where the Armenian women were virtually no Armenian woman worked.
yeah.
Period. To see that they were doctors and scientists and street sweepers who were women. I mean, in everything in between. That was, the Soviet Union did encourage that, is my understanding.
Yeah.
But still, it seems to be innate in the culture.
Yeah. I want to segue to something that you talked about. You mentioned that it's always important. It's also important to pay attention to your hobbies and passions. And one of your passions is wine. So I want to address that. You mentioned that you've taken like interest and I don't know if can I call you a wine connoisseur at this point? Is that correct?
Yeah, reasonably fair. Yes.
Tell me the love story of you and wine.
Well, actually, it started in Armenia as a 9-year-old. My parents took me there. This was obviously Soviet times, and went to a shop, and I was fascinated with the notion that you store wine and one day it will be better.
Mm.
So I asked this person a whole lot of questions. Ended up wrapping a piece of paper. This really, what turned out to be a horrible bottle in the end. But Soviet wine, but like it was fascinating. You can open it 10 years later, and that was an optimum time to drink it, and so on. So since then, I had mild enthusiasm, but the seed was planted actually in Armenia, so to speak. And then when I had that successful exit, and we basically, hey, we won. So
Let's
uh,
celebrate.
so but I turned it into more like a hobby slash venture in a way, because it was like there were spreadsheets and there was like constant research. I had helpers fill in data and
Wow.
mapping out the whole world. And people are going, "You're sure this is a hobby?" Like, yeah, it's a hobby. So ultimately fell in love with Burgundy wines, and just like a venture again. So I go there. I know the people who make the wines. I sit with them. I talk about what they do. It's part of life, actually. So I think you see some wine bottles behind me.
I do.
These are some of the unicorns that we've had the pleasure of tasting. Um, yes, so I think that is actually maybe the closest thing to balancing would be to an entrepreneur, is to take on something. Like wine is an intellectual exercise, it's a social exercise. You stay away from the business. The joke is that how do you make
Mm.
a small fortune in wine is you start with a big one. So not to discourage any
Yeah.
entrepreneurs from the wine world, but the most joy is actually and feeling it. It's very, very fundamental to humanity, right? And Armenia, of course, was the first known wine, oldest known wine area that was discovered, 6,100 years old. We take a lot of pride in that.
Mhm.
I have also, since I came to Armenia, started looking at the Armenian wines, and there is a challenge out there making the best RNE possible.
Yeah.
That should inspire a lot of people, and I think there's quite a bit being done there. So I'm looking forward to see what is the best RNE look
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, me too. I want to know that now after conversations with you. I got inspired a little bit. I'm starting to drink a bit more wine on Fridays just to get a taste of that. But what is your favorite Armenian wine? Do you have any?
Well, I think the RNE grape is
Mhm.
is the magic, and Moscato for I think it's what it's called for white. Um, I'd like to see more of the small makers come about and give this a whole sort of a storyline beyond the history of the place, beyond all those
Mhm.
kinds of things. And but uh, there are, exciting wines out there at they're different levels, right? There's Zora, there's what um, Vahe is doing, Adam is doing, and Alexandria, and it's taking some really pioneering work with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in Armenia. There's Yakubian Hobbs, which is an Armenian partnership with an American winemaker. Um, Quite a bit of diaspora involvement, which is actually bringing people together.
Mhm.
But I'm really excited. What I'm excited to see is one or two barrel little garagistas coming about and making these really innovative wines. That's really what I'm looking to see, excited about, but also the old families that have been around. Um, like Mariam's family has done a phenomenal job with Trinity. Um, it's just there's a whole renaissance going on in
Mhm.
Armenia for wine. And there are people out there to protect the Armenian vineyards from a disease called phylloxera. It's a fungus that eats the roots of this of the vineyards
Mhm.
of the vines. And so there's a wonderful woman named Anushik, and she's leading the charge there to protect Armenian vines. There's some very exciting things going on. If I wasn't doing AI, I might do wine in Armenia, but it's all consuming. We are 24/7 with our project, and
Yeah.
it just doesn't leave room for. I haven't done any sightseeing actually, which is, in Armenia, that's like one of the first things you do. There's just no time. But again, it's an exciting time for Armenia. We just need to get past uh, the stage, have peace and have prosperity, and expand the economic base beyond Yerevan to rest of Armenia. Um, but I think we have all the right material. We have the DNA to do it,
Mhm.
and I'm
Mhm.
optimistic about it.
That's great to hear because sometimes it's hard to be optimistic about Armenia's future considering the instabilities. You just have all of this doubts and thoughts but yeah, it's good to have people like you who are working on projects in Armenia. And what's next for Hike in Armenia or beyond Armenia? What's your next biggest goal in your projects? If you
Well,
may share that.
we want to be successful with this, of course,
Yeah.
and we're doing everything we can for for it. Beyond that, uh, uh, I'll just have to, look and see. Uh, there aren't that many people with my age doing actually hands-on work. Most people tend to end up in executive board positions and things like that. That's just not me. So we're done with this. There'll be another thing that I will want to roll up my sleeves and dive into. And I
Mhm.
especially love working with the young people, talking about age. I didn't mention this. I mean, virtually everyone on our team is, early 20s, in
Mhm.
their early 20s. And they're actually the most malleable, productive, and we've developed our own little culture that is like some kind of a blend of Silicon Valley meets Armenia, a little bit of a European infusion. Um, so, so I'm particularly excited about that. But what comes next, I really can't think about that because right now, this is the focus.
Amazing. With that, thank you so much, Ike. I had the pleasure of talking to you today and just like, going through all the interesting ups and downs, your entrepreneurial journey, your journey as a human being, your growth, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to tell the story. You've done a wonderful job. I have watched your other podcasts, and of course, I know some of these people. Chinar is wonderful,
Yeah.
and others too. So it's exciting work that you're doing. Actually, you're fulfilling a very important part of this journey for all of us in the Armenian community and beyond. So I thank you wholeheartedly for giving me the opportunity to tell this little story here.
Thank you. That means the world.